My name is Dr. Judith Joseph. I'm a board certified psychiatrist, and I treat children, adults, and families in my New York City practice. I'm also assistant clinical professor at NYU Langone Medical Center in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry.
I'm Dido, Balla, head of education at the Goldie Hawn Foundation, MindUP, and my focus is all around the work that takes all the tools that MindUP has from a program to bring it into the kids in every single school around the world. The focus is on the kids, but it starts with training adults because the adults are the ones who are the vehicle for the tools that we share into the kids.
Dido, what type of work is MindUP focusing on in the programs?
Thanks, Dr. Judith. The work that we do is focused around 4 specific pillars. The first one is neuroscience. The second one is mindful awareness. Third one is positive psychology. And the fourth is social and emotional learning. So the work that we do is take those 4 pillars and distill each one into very simple lessons that kids as young as 5 can understand, so they can have a little better understanding of how their brain works, how the emotions function, how to regulate those emotions, as a practice perspective taking. And all those tools are ultimately super useful for mental fitness, emotional health. So that's what the focus is. But once again, although we focus on kids, we don't forget the adults, because adult self-care, adult social and emotional learning is where things need to start if you want to get a chance to get to the kids ultimately.
Dido, thank you for explaining that. Can you please tell me a bit more about those 4 pillars and why they're so applicable to kids today?
Absolutely. I think it's important to go back to 2020 and the pandemic, which forced the entire world to take a brain break, take a mindful moment, because we are so busy running around, going up and down, taking care of our tasks, our to-do lists, that often we forget what matters the most, which is our own personal health. And so what I realized is that when COVID happened and folks had to stay at home, they were forced to confront the fact that there was a lot that happens in here that we don't take care of. And when I say in here, I mean the mind. And the single most important thing in your body to understand is the brain. So the first pillar of neuroscience, what we do there is that we teach kids that when your body responds a certain way to stress, when your body responds a certain way to a perceived danger or to anxiety, there's nothing wrong with you. All that means is that your little brain is functioning well, and it is trying to protect you from the stressors that are coming from outside. Now, going to the stressors from before COVID, the regular stressors, so having a bad grade, bullying in school, cyberbullying, not getting all the food that you need, not sleeping enough, all those things trigger your brain. And then when you add a pandemic and the break of normalcy, the break of routines, all those things get to your brain and make you feel as if you are in danger, make you feel like you need to jump, to fight, flight, freeze. And that brings a lot more stress and anxiety. So that first pillar of neuroscience allows kids and adults to just understand basically how their brains work. And then if you shift into the second pillar about mindful awareness, you can practice emotion regulation. Once you have the awareness of the emotion, you can regulate them to have more control. Because when you don't control what happens to you, it's important to realize that you can control how you respond to what happens to you. So that second tool.
Sounds like that first pillar really has to do with normalizing something that maybe we took for granted before the pandemic. Like maybe we walked around not realizing that stress does exist, and stress does affect both children and adults and families. And that from what you're saying, the pandemic really highlighted the need to validate that stress and bring it into the normal everyday conversation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and validate it and also make it normal. There's the stigma around stress and mental health is one that we need to work on getting rid of. Because if you think about our cars, when you have a car, nobody needs to tell you that you need gas for the car to work. When it's time to change the oil, you get to take care of it. So that's one thing. It's a possession. Now, our physical bodies, we have become a lot better at knowing to think about what we eat, go to the gym, exercise. But we've forgotten about the mind and the brain. It's the same thing. So it just normalizes it.
Yeah, it's similar to what I see in my practice as well. A lot of times parents, they don't realize that certain things that their children are doing is related to stress, right? So sometimes a child will be irritable and you're walking on eggshells around them. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done around parenting helping them to understand how different kids express stress and anxiety differently.
Yes, and I'm curious, have you seen anything different from COVID when you compare it to before?
Definitely, I'm sure you have as well. So like before, children probably naturally dealt with a stressful day by going into their rooms, playing, or going to their rooms doing something creative. However, post-COVID, a lot of those creative type of play activities may not have been as easily accessible. And, what I've seen is that sometimes a lot of that play had to do with, engaging with other kids, and that social isolation really hampered that play. And I'm curious to see how MindUP really promotes that kind of socialization and that engaging aspect of play that we all know is so important to the developing brain.
Yes, one of the key findings around the research on MindUP is that it actually increases pro-social behavior. And the reason why it does that is that we have a model that goes from me to we. When you start by having awareness around how your own brain works and your feelings work, and you work on regulation of those emotions, then guess what you can do well? You can see other people and realize what might be going on with them, or how you might not contribute into triggering them, or how you can actually have co-regulation. So the more you can understand yourself, your own brain, your own feelings, the more you can be a social being. And we all know, the research is in as well, right, that socializing with people is one of the top things to increase your mental health. So that isolation that came from being stuck at home made things difficult for that social aspect. So now that we're back in person, MindUP is encouraging kids to learn together with each other. And also, that's why working with the parents is useful. Because if the parents can also have a similar understanding of the brain, their emotions, emotion regulation, then they can support what's happening in schools, but they can also encourage their kids to socialize with others.
Dido, I liked how you brought up that you're teaching parents how to teach their kids to learn to be social again, because I think that that's something that a lot of children felt rusty with. Socializing has become more difficult because if you don't practice something, you don't practice a skill, you're not as good as it, or you don't feel as masterful at it, right? And so I love how MindUP is encouraging parents to teach their kids how to be social again, because a lot of children need support in that area.
Yeah, I just talked to a school leader a couple of days ago who was talking about a kid who did not even know that real stores existed. This kid thought that Amazon was the way to shop, and the day she found out she can go to a physical place, see the item she wants to buy, and touch it, and there are other people doing that, her brain couldn't comprehend that. So what we're trying to do is re-educate those kids and those parents and realize that if the brain, as it was growing around those precious years, was not exposed to that kind of life, it would be difficult for that kid to socialize normally. So be very thoughtful and mindful into how you slowly reintroduce those things to the kid and teach them that while it may seem unusual for their brains because of COVID, this is actually normal. People go outside, people spend some time together, people socialize.
That's fascinating. And then you were beginning to talk about the third pillar. What is the third pillar?
So the third pillar is around, the third pillar is positive psychology. The way I like to think about this is that you don't control your environment, you control how you respond to it. Your brain has a negativity bias to protect you initially, but with the way the world has changed, there is so much to be grateful for. There's so much optimism to be had. And we train kids on how to identify the things that trigger their brains and send them into that negativity bias, but then learn how to scan the world for the things that are working, for the things that you do have, and not always obsess so much over the mistakes of the past or the anxiety about what might happen tomorrow, but just being present in the moment and appreciate that gratitude of, I'm here, I am talking to you, I have this time to connect with you. And when we teach those skills intentionally to the kids, we realize that we start to train them to seek those outside of the world. Don't just go to the negative news, look for the good news. Don't just look for the bad guys, look for the good guys, because they're there.
You're right. And this is something that I hear every day in my practice. Just last week, a mother said, how do I teach my child gratitude? How do I teach my child empathy? And I think from what you're saying, MindUP teaches parents how to model gratitude, how to model empathy, how to model these positive behaviors that we want to see in our children for your kids. Because if you don't model it, where are they going to learn it? They learn it from watching you. And it's really important, I think, in mental health, we focus a lot about how do we fix this problem of depression rather than how do we cultivate joy, because we need to learn how to find the positive aspects in life. Studies show that if we can increase our points of joy just a little bit every day, overall our well-being improves. So I think that that's fascinating. Please tell me a bit more about the fourth pillar.
So the fourth pillar is just the overall social and emotional learning, which is all encompassing, which is just the idea that if you learn how to have awareness of your emotions, regulate them, then you can have social awareness. You can have better relationships with people and make better decisions. So it's all encompassing. And I think about this as a holistic way to view people. You aren't just a doctor, you are a human being. As a student, you aren't just a kid who wants to learn English or math in a classroom. You are a full human being. You aren't just a parent, you are a full human being. And the more we can look at people that way, the more we realize that if you show up to class, even as a teacher, the things that happened to you the 3 hours before you showed up affected the way you show up. If you're a student and you show up to class cranky, upset, or whatnot, the things that happened to you outside of your role as a student impacted who you are. And the more we can all look at people that way and ourselves that way, I think the kinder we're going to be to ourselves and to others.
And that cross-generational learning is super important, Dido, because we know that certain older generations, even millennials think differently than Gen Z, then think differently than this new generation that's even younger that we haven't even really given a name for. That we know that the younger generations tend to find happiness when their community is happy. It's really hard for them if they're in a group that's not inclusive because they're used to seeing other ethnicities, other cultures. And so we know that they really define happiness based on how their entire group feels rather than individually. And that's something that I feel like we have to re-educate parents about because, where they may have come from generations where people are more individualistic, the younger generations need to feel happy if their group is happy. So including others and engaging others and that social emotional learning with others is really important.
I think we're saying the same thing. We're seeing the importance of valuing who you are and not always having goals attached to outside. I will be happy when I do this. I will be more comfortable when I achieve that. That's not how it works. The science doesn't support it. You need to raise your current level of optimism, kindness, gratitude. And when you do that, your brain is actually better in optimal conditions to pursue your goals, your dreams, to achieve your goals. And we're social beings. Once again, the more you can interact with people, the more your brain rewards you. So when it comes to pushing and emphasizing the power of gratitude, when you do something good for somebody else, your brain releases all the happy chemicals that make you feel so good because we are wired to do things for each other. That's why you hear about this concept that is called the helper's high. The helper's high means that you essentially feel high on happiness when you do something else, something for somebody else. And when you've seen the pay forward at Starbucks, you pay for the person behind you, they pay for the person next behind them. It's that chain of kindness, which once again shows that alone, there's a lot we can do, but it's not enough. It's together that we can achieve all our goals.